Hello and welcome back to Blender's procedural bridge course. In this lesson we will finally create stone bricks for our bridge by using the node group which we created called stone bricks and reusing this inside our bridge setup. So for now we can hide our testing object which we used for the stone bricks and bring up back our bridge. And now if we go to Geometry Nodes workspace and you hit Shift A, you can go to groups and here you can see your stone brick node group. If we bring this up, you can see that we have exactly the same inputs as we had in the modifiers tab before, but now we can reuse this here and create some nice stone bricks around the railings. So that will be our first thing we will be working on. And then we will also try to add stone bricks around these holes to finish this nice bridge. So the only things we actually need to get is creating curves along the railings and then just plugging them into our stone bricks setup, and same thing for the stone bricks around the holes. Before that we might also group these nodes a little bit so we know actually what they are doing. This part is doing basic distribution of the hole objects. So I'll call it distribute hole objects. And this part above it is aligning them along the original curve. So let's call it align holes along base curve. And now we can work on the stone bricks. For creating curves along our railings, we will use a simple trick, and the trick works in that way that here in the profile we will add 2 points here at the position where we want the railings curves to be, which are these positions. We will add just a simple point here, and then we will, after creating the whole bridge, we will separate these and create stone bricks on them. So we will add a new points, and to show you how it works is I'll just add a new simple point. I'll convert it to curves, so I'll add points to curves node, and I'll plug it into this joint geometry. Now if we view this curve after displacement, which is what we wanted, you can see that now when I put the point here, or now you can actually view the point. If I put it, you can see it's here. I'll put it somewhere here, for example. And if I view the swept geometry, you can see that there is this curve on the top, which we can control with our point. So if I move this, you can see that it's moving nicely. So we'll just need to create these 2 points and then separate them from the base geometry and use them for the stone bricks. We will need to calculate positions of these points, and those should be similar which we used for our railings profiles. So for this one, at the top left, it will be something like, or let's actually do this one, and then we will use same technique, which will just scale it on the x-axis by -1, which will generate point here. So we'll create this point where the position, I'll just add combine xyz. And on the y-axis, it should be pretty simple because it will be this height plus this height, so it's rail height plus height. So I'll add group input and sum or add a rail height with the original height and plug it into y-axis. And now the x-axis will be width of the bridge minus half of the rail width. So let's add an addition, or it will be subtract. We will subtract from the width, and the value which we'll be subtracting is rail width divided by 2, so we can multiply this by 0.5 and plug this into the x-axis. where I checked the point and it's over there, which means on the x-axis it should be only, yeah, it should be width divided by 2 and then subtracting. So we can also multiply this by 0.5. And now if we view this, you can see it should be in the right spot here. Now we can just use a transform geometry and scale this on x-axis by -1 and join it with the original. So something like this. But you can see that if we do it before the points to curves, it actually connects these points to curve. And we don't actually want this, we want this to be separated. So let's do this after points to curve node. So it will look something like this. And now we have these points here, which should create our profile which we are looking for. Let's check it here after displacement. And yeah, now you can see that there are these curves here and here. If I, for example, change this a little bit, yeah, you can see that the second curve is moving, so that's looking pretty fine. And now we just need to separate these from our mesh. We can do this by assigning some kind of attribute for them and then just checking if it actually exists for each point. So let's add store named attribute. We can set it to Boolean, for example, and check it to true. We'll call it rail curve. And now if we go after this the displacement and add a named attribute with the same name and view if it exists. Okay, it looks like it's true for all the points. So we will also need to set this value to false. Maybe if we view the attribute. Yeah, if we use just the attribute, you can see that here something is true. Yeah, it's true here. So we can use it for these. And we can just use separate geometry. We'll be separating points and selecting only the points where this attribute is true. And now if we view the selection, you can see that we have these perfect curves, which we'll just plug into our stone bricks. So to sum it up, we created 2 points, stored some kind of value to be able to separate them later. And then we used separate geometry and used this attribute to separate these. Now we have these nice curves. Currently those are meshes, so we'll need to convert these back to curves. So let's add a mesh to curve node. Now those are curves. And yeah, the last part for these is just adding the stone bricks. So let's add a stone brick and plug this curve into the geometry. And now if we view this, you can see that we have some kind of stones here. We'll just play around with these values a little bit. So maybe something like this. And the problem here is that you can see that those are rotated in some kind of wrong direction. And we can just fix these by setting the normal of these curves. So let's add a set curve normal, and set this to Z up, which should reset the normals to point upwards. And now those are nicely aligned. We can also use our brick material and maybe add some kind of length randomness. Also increase the length. And you can play around with these how you like it. If we combine this with our resulting mesh, you will see that those are looking pretty good. I might make them shorter. something like this. The length randomness can be something like 0.1. And now you can see that we have pretty nice stones here, which work really great with the railings. We'll also want to be able to control all of these parameters from the outside of the node group, but we will add this at the end when we have also working the stone bricks around the holes. Alright, so if we take a look at the part where we are creating the holes, you can see that this mesh boolean node also gives us this intersecting edges. That's something we might be able to use. So let's actually try to separate these edges from the original mesh. I'll add separate geometry like this. The geometry will be the mesh we can use, and the intersecting edges will be for the selection. And now if we view this, you can see that if we use the separate geometry, it gives us also some edges which we don't want. But if you switch this to edge, it actually creates exactly what we are looking for. So those are the outlines along which we want to create our stone bricks. So let's convert these meshes to curves with mesh to curve. And then we can just duplicate the stone bricks for now and use this. If you view this, you can see that we have pretty nice stone bricks here along the holes, and I think it's pretty good, and we can use this to finish our whole bridge. So if we also combine this with the joint geometry and plug this into this, you can see that the holes are nicely arranged with the stones around it, and we can change all their parameters here. So now the last part is adding all of these parameters to our group input, and we can also make this a little simpler by using only one stone bricks setup and plugging all of these curves to it. So for this, I'll just delete the stone bricks for the railings, and I'll combine these two curves together. So let's add the joint geometry. And we will plug these railing curves and these hole curves together. So let's combine them with joint geometry, and we will plug this result of joint geometry to stone bricks. And now if we view this, you can see that we have nice stone bricks along all of these. And we can just combine it with the mesh which we get from the mesh boolean here to the joint geometry, and yeah, now we have the finished bridge. So the last things we will add some inputs for these, and also overall material of the whole bridge, so it's not like this white, or it has some kind of gray or stone texture. So now we will add all of these parameters to our group input. So I'll add a new panel and call it stone bricks. And now if I bring up group input, we can use this empty socket to create a new group input actually, and it will be added here at the top. If we do this for each of these, it's, I think, still better than creating all of the parameters by hand. So I'll do this for all of these inputs. And now I will move all of these parameters to my stone bricks panel. Alright, now when we are done, you can see that we can control these parameters from the group input. And we might also add a shade smoothing for the bricks. So let's go to stone bricks by selecting the node group and hitting tab, which will move us to this node group. And I'll add one more input, which will be shade smooth. and I'll add set shade smooth depending on the value which we get here. Also the type will be set to boolean. And I'll just plug shade smooth from the group input to the shade smooth value. Now if I hit tab again, I'll go back to my original node group, and if I turn this off, you can see that this will look a little better. And yeah, I think it's looking pretty nice. Let's also add this shade smooth to my group input. So I'll add one more input and move this to my stone brick panel. And you can always hide unused sockets with using Ctrl H, so it will look a little better than having this long group input here. So now let's also add material for our bridge. So I'll add a new input, call it material. And we will also assign this material to our original mesh. So let's add a set material here and use this first material to our material. And now we can create a very simple material for it. So let's add a new material, call it bridge mat. I'll set it for now to something gray and assign it to my setup. And if we go to shading workspace, we can actually set some different values for this or create some better textures with noise. So we can, for example, use Voronoi texture and use distance. And now we can plug the color ramp into the distance. Maybe scale down or scale up this texture. And let's actually switch this to distance to edge. And this will give us a little nicer values. And by combining it with, for example, this distance, we can use this for example for using the normal. So let's add a bump node. We will plug this value to the height and the normal to normal, and we can use this. Maybe switch this back. This one. You can see that we have these interesting displacements, which looks like stone texture or stones, and we can play around with these. One last thing I would add is also shade smoothing of our bridge. So let's go to geometry nodes, let's add a new input and call it shade smooth. Switch type to boolean. And we can do this by setting the material. We can also use angle smooth or smooth by angle. And now this ignore sharpness will control our shade smoothing. So let's connect shade smooth to this and enable it. Now it looks a little better. And yeah, I think our bridge is finished. And now we can play around with all of the parameters. You can, for example, just change the shape. I can delete all of these. And if I want just straight bridge, I can do something like this. Thanks so much for following along with this Blender Geometry Nodes bridge course. I hope you've picked up some valuable tips for creating with Geometry Nodes. Don't forget to leave a review. It really helps us understand what went well and where we can improve. And if you enjoyed this course, be sure to check out our other lessons. We have one that teaches you to create a fully animated, procedurally generated stylized fire, and another for crafting a brick wall from scratch. See you in the next course and happy creating!